You are looking live at the White House on this rainy day in Washington and a day of victory for President Donald Trump. This is live coverage from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey. The president plans to make remarks around noon about his acquittal, and we'll bring that to you live and uninterrupted. It's the coda to the impeachment drama we've watched unfold on Capitol Hill these last weeks and months. Well, the president started today at the National Prayer Breakfast, and I want you to take a look at this image for the history books. The day after a deeply divided Senate vote to acquit President Trump, the president entered an event which is supposed to display reconciliation and held up the front pages of two newspapers, USA Today and there's ours, the Washington Post. With me now to talk about all that's happening today in the context of this, Robert Costa and Tolu Olorunipa. Thank you so much to both of you for being here. You know, Bob, the prayer breakfast, President Trump has used it before to sort of talk about his ratings and sort of, you know, the Trump advertising wing of his business, basically. But usually it's a place of reflection, of unity, of coming together. What did it mean for the president to be able to use this moment to hold up these newspapers, to show these headlines, this one right here, that he's been acquitted?
Well, you could look below the fold to my story with Dan Balls as well. Just kidding. I wrote about Mitt Romney.
and tell us about it. Yeah, tell us about it.
No,
the headline there.
But I mean,
after historic break with GOP, Romney awaits the consequences.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, below the fold, Tolu. Didn't make above the fold. But no, Libby, it's great to be here, and I think your question's in the key one, because it's not just about the setting of the prayer breakfast. I think of this moment this morning, as President Trump's about to speak, as the end of a trial and impeachment and the beginning of a campaign. And what President Trump did when he lifted up those newspapers this morning is effectively kick off a campaign that has been going in earnest for months. But he is signaling to Democrats, to his opponents in the Republican Party, like Senator Romney, that this campaign is in full form, from the State of the Union to the remarks at the prayer breakfast to the later remarks today. This is a president with grievance, populism, confidence based on the economic numbers, a Republican Party, except for Romney, that's all at his side. So Democrats, as they reel from Iowa and look toward New Hampshire, have to look at this president and see him emboldened as he has ever been.
Tolu, what does the president want to accomplish today as he thinks about message, tone? This is his moment to finally sort of reflect as this impeachment process is wrapped up.
Yeah, the word that Bob used that stuck in my mind is grievance. I think the president is going to be airing his grievances and talking about how poorly he believes he was treated by this entire process. He is emboldened. He does feel somewhat vindicated by the process, but he's also worried and concerned that forever his name is going to be attached to the word impeachment. And I think that's something that's going to be on display as he makes his remarks later today. He's going to go after his enemies. We heard the White House talk about the idea of payback, trying to, you know, have revenge on the people who impeached him and on the Democrats who have spent the past several months investigating him, impeaching him, putting him on trial in the Senate, all things that he does not want associated with his name, even though he held up the word acquitted, and he's hoping that that will sort of provide some kind of a salve for this past 4 months of impeachment. I do believe the president is going to be very much unvarnished. We're going to hear the raw version of President Trump. We heard during the State of the Union address the teleprompter version where he was on message talking about the economy, talking about what he's done working across the aisle, working in various minority communities with different policies. This is going to be pure, raw President Trump, a grievance artist, someone who really wants to whip up his support, not necessarily someone who wants to bring the country together.
So, as senators on the Republican side of the aisle, who are moderates, who seem to be weighing whether or not to call for witnesses. Many of them decided not to. A couple said they did want to hear from witnesses during impeachment, but ultimately they all voted to acquit except for Mitt Romney. Some of those senators have gone on TV, have remarked on social media that they believe the president is chastened. They believe he won't do it again. I'm going through the list here. Senator Susan Collins, Lamar Alexander, others, Joni Ernst. They seem to have a message of the president has learned something from this. When they say he won't do it again, what exactly are they saying he won't do, or they hope he won't do, Bob? And does the president need to factor that into his tone today?
Well, Senator Susan Collins appears to have walked back from that initial comment where she said maybe the president has learned something. She was, to say the least, ridiculed by some Democrats and some Republican voices, more of the never Trump crowd, who said, how could you make a statement like that? He has never seemed to learn a lesson from anything. He's a politician and a person who does not apologize, who always moves forward, regardless of what critics are saying. You're looking at a president right now, to Lou's point as well, who is in this grievance moment. At the same time, if you listen to that State of the Union, he's not talking about impeachment at all. He's not talking about lessons learned. It's all about the economy and reaching out to minority voters. And I was struck by how Democrats, when I was at the Senate this week, are trying to process all of this. And they're concerned because they look at 2018 and they say to themselves, we have a good pathway to power. We won back the House by focusing on health care and jobs. And they were pretty focused. And Speaker Pelosi this week was saying health care, health care, health care. At the same time, Democrats going to have to be cognizant that as much as they want to talk about health care and jobs, President Trump is going to be talking about whatever he wants to talk about every day, changing the page of the debate. And that, for many Democrats who still operate in a position of old school political norms, that's not a cozy place to be. They don't love this position they're in. They feel like they have a case to be made to the voters on the economy and jobs and health care. But they worry that President Trump, with his political style and personality, will overwhelm them at times.
So, so Joni Ernst, basically, when she was talking about lessons learned, she's saying that if President Trump's trying to do certain things, like ferret out corruption, that he go through proper channels, right? That he wouldn't use this irregular channel this run around. So that's where she hopes he alters his behavior, to Lou. But there's the bigger question of just how he might talk about the election. Would he ask other countries to interfere in the election? I mean, how do these moderate Republicans, and Ernst isn't really a moderate Republican, but how do the Republicans who've raised some questions or said there are some lessons learned here, listen to him today with an ear towards certainly not contrition? I mean, might we hear a message of, okay, I've learned something?
I doubt that we will hear that. I think the president still seems to want to say that his call with the Ukrainian president was perfect. He's characterized that. He said he's done nothing wrong. I don't think that there will be much contrition. And the other thing I don't think there will be much of in terms of this particular speech is something else that Republican senators want to hear, which is let's move on. When Bill Clinton came out in 1999 after he was acquitted during his impeachment trial, he apologized. He did have contrition, but he also said, let's get back to the work of the country. Let's focus on various things, bipartisan issues that we can work on. President Trump may make a nod to that, but it seems from what we're hearing from the White House that he really wants to air his grievances. He wants to have revenge. He wants to dwell on this in terms of having payback, going against his political enemies, vindicating himself by saying that what he did was perfect and that he did nothing wrong and that he should never have been impeached. So we might expect to hear more about impeachment from the president than several of these Republican senators who just want to move on want to hear. They want to hear him say, okay, I was vindicated, I was exonerated, now let's talk about the economy, let's talk about my legislation, my agenda for the next year, and my upcoming election. But it seems like the president wants to talk about being vindicated and going after his enemies.
So, the prayer breakfast this morning is an opportunity for a reset. It's an opportunity for reflection. And you think about the remarkable collision of events this week, Iowa caucus, so really the kickoff of the 2020 voters weighing in, 2020 campaign, State of the Union, and then yesterday, of course, the president being acquitted. So let's listen to how the president chose to use his time at the podium this morning. This is from the National Prayer Breakfast, and his goal was, in part, lashing out at political rivals.
Our great country and your president have been put through a terrible ordeal by some very dishonest and corrupt people. They have done everything possible to destroy us, and by so doing, very badly hurt our nation. They know what they are doing is wrong, but they put themselves far ahead of our great country. Weeks ago and again yesterday, courageous Republican politicians and leaders had the wisdom, fortitude, and strength to do what everyone knows was right. I don't like people who use their faith as justification for doing what they know is wrong. Nor do I like people who say I pray for you when they know that that's not so. So many people have been hurt, and we can't let that go on.
President Trump seemed to be attacking House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Utah Senator Mitt Romney for justifying their impeachment actions on religious grounds. And I have to point out, Bob, that Speaker Pelosi was sitting right there as he was saying this. Speaker
Pelosi grew up in Baltimore. Nancy D'Alessandro, she's a devout member of the Roman Catholic Church. Mitt Romney, senator from Utah, grew up at the side of George Romney, the former governor of Michigan, a member of the Jesus Christ Church of Latter-day Saints, a Mormon. When Romney gave his speech on the Senate floor yesterday, it was framed as something driven by a sense of duty, a commitment to his faith and his values. And Speaker Pelosi, throughout this entire process, has talked about, in a solemn way, the need to have a prayerful pursuit of public policy, and has framed impeachment as something that's driven by her own values. President Trump can't stand this. His officials and his friends tell me that this particular version of critiquing him, of coming from a moral foundation and saying things are inspired by faith, he really can't stand it, because he also believes that is a threat, in a way, to his own base among evangelical Christians who, despite his behavior and controversial conduct in the past, have stuck by him year after year because he provides them with so many policy gains and judicial nominations. We'll talk more about this interesting intersection of faith and politics. But first, let's go to the White House, where our Rhonda Colvin has been reporting this morning. So, Rhonda, we usually see you on Capitol Hill. You're at the White House today. What's the atmosphere like there?
Well, there was a little confusion a little bit ago. We were all waiting to get into the East Room to set up and shoot from there, but they asked crews to come back out for a little bit. There was some idea that there wasn't enough space in there, so crews were waiting out in the rain for about an hour to enter the East Room. I'm not quite sure if this will start on time, right at 12 on the dot, because I believe that they're still setting up, still trying to accommodate the size of media here to cover this. From what we know and what we've heard so far this morning, we don't have any advanced knowledge of what he is about to say, although if you take hints from the prayer breakfast, or if you take hints from his press secretary, Stephanie Grisham, who made comments today that he will probably talk about how hard this was for his family. He also said that over the weekend during a Super Bowl interview with Sean Hannity. He's likely going to stay in that vein, that this was hard, he was treated very unfairly. So that's probably the common refrain we're about to hear from the president. We, again, aren't sure if this is going to happen right at 12 on the dot, but we will certainly keep you posted. And that's what it's like from the White House today.
All right, Rhonda, thank you so much. So let's get back to this question of prayer and faith. You know, Mitt Romney talked about it, as you mentioned. Speaker Pelosi has been repeatedly referencing her faith. How hard was this decision for Mitt Romney?
He said to our colleague Dan Balls in an interview yesterday that it was the hardest decision of his political career. And our colleague Ashley Parker had a notable tweet that went somewhat viral. And she was a Romney embed inside the campaign as a reporter for the New York Times in 2012. And she recalled that Romney rarely at the time spoke about his faith, that he is someone who has been proud of his Mormon faith, but not always put it at the front of who he is politically. But yesterday, he spoke at length about his faith and his conscience and his values. And I spoke to John Meacham, the presidential historian, yesterday, and I said, where does Romney fit? Because at one level, it's about faith, and it's about his own personal decision. But in the Republican story of American politics, where does he fit? And Meacham said, which I think is pretty spot on, he's now casting himself as a character in history alongside Gerald Ford, George H.W. Bush, Dwight Eisenhower, moderate Republicans who have stood up to more populist, nationalist, conservative Republicans out of a sense of duty or just their own sensibility. And Romney really established himself as a figure in that group by his decision yesterday. We'll be talking about that for years to come, the one Republican who broke ranks, a former party nominee.
So really the leader, the former leader of the Republican Party. You know, I also think his speech will be one that will be looked at and
emotional. He caught his voice.
And watched for years to come. So let's watch part of Senator Romney on the floor yesterday and talking about how he was guided by his faith and also the eyes of history.
As a senator juror, I swore an oath before God to exercise impartial justice. I am profoundly religious. My faith is at the heart of who I am. I take an oath before God as enormously consequential. I knew from the outset that being tasked with judging the president, the leader of my own party, would be the most difficult decision I have ever faced. I was not wrong.
Mitt Romney on the Senate floor yesterday announcing that he was going to vote to convict the president on abuse of power. He voted not guilty on the question of obstruction of Congress, saying that the House could have gone farther in the legal process to try to get more information, documents, witnesses, but he did believe that it was his duty to convict the president, and it only takes a conviction on one count to be removed from office. Now, of course, there was nowhere near the votes, the 67 vote threshold for that, but when you decide to convict on one, it's not a 50-50. It's not, you're not going halfway. Tolu, it is voting to remove the president from office.
Yeah, and he predicted that he would be the target of smears and attacks from not people that he's used to being on the opposite side of, but from people within his own camp, other Republicans, the president. Part of the reason the president has been able to keep such a stranglehold on his party and keep everyone in line is that he has shown no concern about attacking other Republicans in vicious ways, attacking them on Twitter, attacking them online, taking very sort of low ball techniques towards attacking his own members of his own party, and that's caused a lot of people who disagree with him, who think that he's done something wrong, to not even be willing to say that, you know, the president was improper or inappropriate, and definitely not to vote against him. But Mitt Romney was willing to do that.
Is there some irony here about, you know, Adam Schiff was warning the senators, you know, don't be afraid to have, you know, the president's going to try to put your head on a pike, but you've got to stand up and be courageous. And we heard senators like Lisa Murkowski really like offended by that, by sort of Adam Schiff sort of trying to push and prod them and warn them of what might happen. And yet here we see Mitt Romney being attacked already. Yeah,
he is being viciously attacked online. The president's own family members are saying he should be expelled from the Republican Party. The Republican National Committee has released videos attacking him. His own niece, who's the head of the Republican National Committee, has said that I stand with President Trump and I disagree with Mitt, not even saying I disagree with my uncle, but naming him by his first name. It's clear that he is persona non grata in certain sectors of the Republican Party. I don't believe that Mitch McConnell and some of the senators who know Mitt Romney well are going to actually expel him from the party.
Well, they still want his vote. I mean, they still need his vote inside the Senate.
They definitely still need his vote, but President Trump doesn't think that way. He thinks in terms of loyalty, and Romney just gave the most significant act of disloyalty, and I think we'll hear about that later today from the president.
And Senate Majority Leader McConnell, in his news conference yesterday, showed how different the Trump loyalist world is versus the actual world of Senate Republicans. A reporter asked McConnell, you may have seen it, he said, hey, is Mitt Romney, the Utah senator, in the doghouse? And Senator Majority Leader McConnell said, there are no doghouses in the Senate. And he's right, because what does the White House want? Do they really want to expel Romney and not have his vote on judicial nominations if a Supreme Court opening is on the horizon? Do they really want to not have Romney as part of that conference? Of course they want the Romney vote. But for President Trump, who puts such a premium on loyalty, and he wanted to say this was a partisan exercise, to have Romney now give it the bipartisan stamp, just one vote, but still one, it infuriates a White House where everything's about adherence to President Trump and his agenda.
Well, Senator Romney was braced for it. He knew this was coming. He sat down with Chris Wallace of Fox News yesterday to explain his vote and show that he was ready for the consequences as they may come. Let's listen.
It's the most difficult decision I've ever made in my life. There's been nothing that compares to this.
And what about the blowback that it's going to come from the president?
I understand it will be substantial, and I have to recognize that it was one or the other. One is to say, I don't want to face the blowback. I don't want to, whether not just from the president, but from my party, from my state, from Republican voters. They'll ascribe all sorts of motives and so forth, and those are all the consequences. But on the other side, there is, do you do what you know is right? Do you do what your conscience and your heart tells you? Do you abide by the oath that you swore to God? And I believe in God, and I believe I have a responsibility to put that first, and to put all those other consequences well behind.
If this means the end of your political career?
Well, a friend of mine once said that the worst thing that ever happened to them politically had already happened. And the worst thing that ever happened to me politically was losing the presidency in 2012. I've got broad enough shoulders to be able to weather personal changes in my career, political or otherwise. But what I don't have is the capacity to ignore my conscience. I don't have the capacity to say that what was wrong was not wrong. What the president did was grievously wrong. And by the way, I say that at a time when I applaud what's happening with the economy. I agree with him 80% of the time. I don't dislike the president. We get along fine. I've known him for years and years, well before politics, before either one of us was in politics. But I believe he made a very serious miscalculation of judgment, one that strikes at the very core of our Constitution. And in a setting like that, not to acknowledge that would place a greater burden on my conscience even than on his.
Mitt Romney yesterday explaining his vote and talking about being aware of the consequences. You know, it's so interesting. Romney did an interview with the New York Times podcast, and he said that he wanted to hear from witnesses, and John Bolton in particular, in hopes that it might actually answer some of his questions and show him that the president had a defense, right? That there was a justification for what the president did. And the witnesses were not allowed, and so he had to come down on the side of this. What does his decision do for those Republicans who were wrestling with their choice on witnesses? And also, Bob, for those moderate Democrats we were watching so closely yesterday to see if they would vote for acquittal.
Well, to your first question, Libby, it raises a question for Toulouse as well, I would think. I don't understand, based on my reporting yet, why, if Senator Romney was reaching out to the White House about more information, witnesses, the White House didn't engage.
He was trying
did
to
the White
get
House
information.
engage with Romney?
We don't have any sense that they did. They wanted complete loyalty. They didn't believe they had to answer. They felt that.
Did those calls just go unanswered? I'm not even clear about that.
Yeah, that's part of the challenge of this White House. The amount of chaos, the lack of organization means that when someone reaches out, a lot of times they don't get the kind of response that they need. And let's face it, they don't necessarily have a good answer for why the president withheld this aid and why he doesn't want any of these witnesses to come forward, other than the idea that we've already seen it from John Bolton's forthcoming book, that he's likely to make more incriminating evidence about the president public soon, and that's part of the reason why the White House felt that they already have the votes. There's no reason to extend this. There's no reason to hear from witnesses, and apparently no reason to even engage with a Republican senator who was thinking about whether or not to vote to convict the president. And I do think there was a lot of confidence from the White House that no Republicans were going to break. They were even predicting that some Democrats were going to come over and have this bipartisan acquittal.
I mean, that was really what they were saying.
They were, and just to follow up on that, it was really fascinating to be at the Senate and see Senator Romney make his decision, and then Senator Manchin announced that he would vote to convict.
Right.
For many Democrats, I pulled aside one Democratic senator. I said, what do you make of Manchin? And they privately told me, how could Manchin vote to acquit if Romney was voting to convict?
Right.
That would have put Manchin, even as a moderate Democrat in a Trump state, in an impossible political position, because he would be giving cover to the president politically while one Republican senator did not. Right. And so you saw Senator Jones, in a tough state, vote to convict on both counts. Senator Manchin, tough state, vote to convict on both counts. And politics is fluid, and it's not that Romney's a direct influence on how Democratic senators vote, but these Democratic senators, based on my reporting, are always calculating what's the full picture here, what's the fallout if I acquit, what's the fallout if I don't. And so Manchin gave a speech condemning the president's behavior, but he voted against, he voted for the articles of impeachment. There you see Stephanie Grisham, White House press secretary, Hogan Gidley, the press team.
Speaker Pelosi was sitting there at the prayer breakfast this morning as President Trump was, not by name, but accusing people of using prayer, invoking prayer, and he showing skepticism about that, really sort of mocking it in some way. And Speaker Pelosi did address it today at her press conference. You know, we saw her go to the podium, and everyone's wondering, is she going to address impeachment? Is she going to address President Trump? And she started her press conference today by asking everyone to pray. Let's watch that.
Good morning, everyone. I just got back from the prayer breakfast, so let's all be very prayerful. As you know, this week we had the State of the Union as required by the Constitution of the United States. The president is to submit in writing or in person his statement of the State of the Union. What happened instead was the president using the Congress of the United States as a backdrop for a reality show, presenting a state of mind that had no contact with reality whatsoever. It was quite appalling to hear the president say to the 150 at least million families in America that are faced with pre-existing medical conditions about a benefit that is afforded to them in the Affordable Care Act, that he was protecting that benefit, when in fact he has done everything to dismantle it. In fact, we are fighting him in the courts right now to preserve that benefit. That misrepresentation was appalling and so clearly untrue.
So Speaker Pelosi, addressing the State of the Union, but she did also, later say that, what he said was completely inappropriate, especially at a prayer breakfast. You guys have pointed out this pivot Democrats want to make to issues, to substance. How hard may that be, Tolu? I mean, who has the microphone right now?
President Trump always has the microphone, and he has the loudest bullhorn, and he uses it very frequently in ways that are unexpected. And it's hard for Democrats to focus on issues because President Trump so regularly blows up political norms, using the prayer breakfast to attack a political opponent and say that their faith is not genuine, using the State of the Union to repeatedly attack a predecessor and make claims about Democrats that seem to indicate that they're un-American in some ways, or that they support socialist ideas that are more akin to what you might see in socialist regimes. What we're expected to see from him later today, using the halls of the White House to go after his political opponents, people who just impeached him, and declare himself, completely vindicated. It's hard for Democrats to focus on issues when President Trump blows up political norms so regularly and throws them off their game a lot by just, being incendiary, being, the type of president that we've come to know him as, which is someone who does not follow the rule book, does not follow political norms, and is willing to go there much farther beyond what previous presidents have done, and even willing to attack members of his own party.
Is there nervousness by Republicans as they prepare for this event, Bob, or is there just a feeling of relief and we're going to move forward? I mean, does
no nervousness. I mean, you think about, we were at the Capitol for the State of the Union. It was a campaign rally inside of the House chamber for many Republicans, roaring cheers, standing on their feet. Rush Limbaugh getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom. This Republican Party, except for a never Trump contingent that's pretty small, Bill Weld's primary campaign, which is struggling in New Hampshire, and Mitt Romney's vote in the Senate, this is a Republican Party that believes President Trump's political capital is everything for them as they move toward November. And you just look at Senator Gardner in Colorado and other vulnerable Republicans who represent fast-changing states with demographics, Latino voters. You look at Georgia, a lot of African-American voters, Latino voters, Asian Americans. They're all sticking with President Trump. I spoke to Senator Perdue yesterday of Georgia, 2 Senate seats up in Georgia, and he said President Trump's focus on criminal justice reform and outreach to historically black colleges and talk of the economy is going to give him a boost in Georgia, and that's what he wants to hear from the president. So they know, 3 years in, they know that at this news conference today or speech, President Trump could go off against Speaker Pelosi, the media, Senator Romney, but they expect it. In fact, they'd be surprised if he didn't go off. The fireworks of President Trump are baked into the Republican perception of their whole party right now. But what matters to them as much as the theater of it is he providing the policies? Is he providing an economic outlook that looks pretty rosy as they make their case to voters?
21 years ago, President Clinton was in a similar situation, impeached in the House, acquitted in the Senate. So I went back into our Washington Post archives to get a sense of how President Clinton dealt with the news that he was acquitted. He did make a Rose Garden statement, but even though he didn't act like he was vindicated, he said he was profoundly sorry for his actions and the great burden they have imposed on the Congress and on the American people, and he was subdued, reports the Washington Post. He pled with Americans to rededicate ourselves to the work of serving our nation and building our future together.
Yeah, it was a somber moment. This will be very different. The president has already sort of created the atmosphere that he likes. Bob talked about how the State of the Union was a campaign rally. The president has already invited key Republican lawmakers that support him. He's kept the press far at the back of the room, not even in seats. We're not expecting for him to take questions. We do expect him to get a lot of applause. You don't normally see applause in presidential news conferences, but the president likes to do that because he likes to have members of his base and lawmakers who support him front and center at these events, and turn them into basically mini campaign rallies where he's able to get applause, where he's able to get a warm reception from lawmakers, and where the press is sort of kept at bay. So it's not your traditional news conference, and I would not expect the president's performance here to be anything like what we saw with Bill Clinton. Instead, this is going to be a sort of a touchdown dance for the president, where he is spiking the football and saying, I was vindicated and now it's time to go after my enemies.
So what does this mean for Democrats in the campaign for 2020, Bob?
Well, you can't ignore the 2020 campaign on the Democratic side. President Trump is the story today, his reaction to impeachment and acquittal. But Senator Sanders and Senator Warren and Mayor Buttigieg and so many others are battling in New Hampshire. Such a lack of clarity out of Iowa. Mayor Buttigieg appears to have gotten a boost. And the question now facing Buttigieg is, can he have a strong performance in New Hampshire? And such a strong performance, a really strong performance, would leave him well positioned for South Carolina. And if Biden underperforms in South Carolina, this race could get wild going into between now and Super Tuesday, because Biden's whole strategy has been South Carolina is the boost he needs to go into Super Tuesday and really try to take on Sanders one-on-one. And if Biden has a strong Super Tuesday, then Mayor Bloomberg's argument falls away. Bloomberg's sitting there hoping, perhaps, if you talk to his allies, that it's a muddled centrist Democratic space, and then he can ultimately say, Biden maybe has underperformed, Mayor Buttigieg is not ready, too young, I'm here with the money and the experience to take on Sanders, then take on Trump.
You're looking at the White House. We're watching for President Trump, of course, to come and address the room. You know, we do expect this to be a moment of victory for the president, a moment of vindication for him. And Tolu, I'd love you to compare this with sort of past speeches the president's had, or past moments or highlights in his presidency as we wait for him to come in.
One moment that I'm thinking of is after the November 2018 election, where the president lost the House, and he came out and gave a wild press conference in which he attacked members of his own party who lost their elections for not embracing him closely enough. He was aggrieved at that moment, and he was really ready, ripping and roaring to say what was on his mind. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a similar situation. Even though he feels vindicated, he still carries that scarlet letter of impeachment, and he still has that on his mind, and he still wants to air his grievances and talk about how wrongly he's been treated, how much he had been, accused of doing something that he thinks that he did not do. I wouldn't be surprised if Mitt Romney gets a lot of attention during this speech, in which the president really lets it rip against Mitt Romney, even though he's a member of his own party. That display of disloyalty in the president's view is going to be worthy of a direct response and a direct attack, and I wouldn't be surprised if the president does that as well. And this whole idea of moving on, focusing on the next battles, focusing on legislative issues, focusing on the things that his campaign wants him to focus on in terms of reaching across the aisle and showing that he's successful as a president. I would be highly surprised if that's the focus of this speech. I think this is more about airing his grievances and talking about how he has been wronged, and naming names and trying to shame all of the people who have been behind this impeachment process since last year in September and October, and saying why he believes that they were, doing something that was bad for the country.
What position does this put Republicans who have criticized President Trump's behavior, who used words that were quite condemning in his behavior, even as they voted to acquit him, even as some of them voted to not even call witnesses, Bob?
Well, Senator Alexander is retiring. He called it inappropriate. Others have called it inappropriate. Their position right now is they're being swept into the tide of the campaign. Unlike President Clinton in 1999, who was trying to reset a bit in his second term, looking to his final 2 years in office and trying to get a few things done, President Trump is looking down the highway, and he's looking at an election. So this idea of resetting to work with Congress, the bitterness is as high as I've ever seen it in the last 3 years, and really in my entire time as a reporter, between the executive branch and the congressional branch. In fact, the legislative branch, I covered the Tea Party versus President Obama, and that was tense. But this is bitter and personal in a way that was, but this is even more visceral.
You know what seems different is that while there were a lot of very personal attacks on President Obama, part of President Obama's messaging and delivery was like, as Michelle Obama said, right? They go low, we go high, right? That you don't, there wasn't that same maybe interplay. And we're seeing from the White House now, from President Trump, using words like shifty Schiff to talk about Adam Schiff, little Adam Schiff, making fun of, using like schoolyard chants and names to mock people, which it truly does change the playing field if you have someone in the Oval Office or from the East Room or from the Rose Garden using that kind of language,
and
whether
Speaker
it's on
Pelosi
social media.
ripping up the paper.
We can even show some of the moments we saw from State of the Union. If we can show some of that footage, that B-roll footage from State of the Union night, you'll see that we saw right there the House Speaker standing behind the president and with such intention picking up segment after segment of the speech and ripping it up.
That was a moment, and that shows you how President Trump has changed American politics. Vitriol, pugilistic style, combined with this nonstop media frenzy. Democrats can't help but, if they're going to counter it, take on some of those tactics. And many Democrats have privately told me they don't love having these kind of fights with President Trump. They don't necessarily love Speaker Pelosi tearing up the script, but they feel like they can't just sit back and play by the old playbook and assume old norms will somehow guide them forward in a world of shattered norms.
It started off rough at the beginning of State of the Union. Speaker Pelosi extended her hand to President Trump. He did not shake her hand. And then we heard Speaker Pelosi, instead of doing the, I have the high honor of addressing, she just said, the President of the United States. And so right there you see as the speeches were handed out, Speaker Pelosi goes to shake the president's hand and it's rejected. Another tone setting moment. And, Speaker Pelosi had the duration of that speech to decide how she was going to act as things were wrapping up, and she chose to use that moment right in front of the line of the camera sight to rip up the speech. And it certainly got people talking about Speaker Pelosi. I think, Bob, was it you who was even people were pointing out on Twitter that President Trump was tweeting and retweeting more about Speaker Pelosi and the speech tearing up than he was about his own speech and taking pride in his own speech yesterday morning. So she not only got a lot of vocal attention of the media, she got the attention of the president himself.
She has a knack for getting under his skin. Ever since she became speaker, especially, she has really needled him in different ways, and the president has shown that he is very disturbed by the way she carries out her speakership and the way she uses the powers of her speakership in many ways to frustrate his agenda, to investigate him, to criticize him. And I would not be surprised if she gets the brunt of his attacks when he comes out to speak, because there's really bad blood between these two. It's built up significantly.
Is there really? I mean, here's what I don't. Here's the one thing I'd always wondered. There's bad blood, clearly. They can't stand each other on a personal level, and that's based on our reporting and just plain sight. However, USMCA, they get a trade deal done that unions like, the president likes. So there's always there's an a complicated side to this relationship, where he's the most pro-labor president in some respects that we've seen in a long time, because he doesn't come out of that traditional Republican mold, and Democrats have played ball with him on trade. So as it's vicious personally, policy-wise, there are some things getting done.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if they try to continue that, because there are areas where the president actually sides more with Democrats and abandons his own party because he has certain ideas about trade, about labor.
Infrastructure.
Right. Where
You think that's possible?
The
Wow.
perennial infrastructure week. I don't know, Bob, but I think it's a talking point. I think it's one that they go out on campaign on and they talk about. I mean,
True.
it's a joke in Washington and that it's infrastructure week because the White House kept saying it's infrastructure week. They put out these themes of the week, and it was in the middle of so many other chaotic news collisions, so no one was talking about infrastructure at all. But it is something that Democrats talk about, and it's something the president talks about.
I always wonder, can you imagine in 2017 if they'd started with infrastructure instead of health care, and it would have been a different presidency. And that was a decision made by Speaker Ryan at the time, the White House, to start with health care. And here we are. Then they did the tax cut. If they'd started with infrastructure, that would have been a bipartisan project from the beginning. History is about choices at times.
So much of the State of the Union on Tuesday night was sort of a constructed optics, almost like a made-for-TV event, with Rush Limbaugh getting in the Medal of Freedom in real time, reuniting a soldier and his family, giving a child a scholarship, financial aid. I wonder how the president and his team think about a moment like this in terms of the stagecraft and the optics and what they want to communicate to Lou.
This is being driven completely by the president. He often calls news conferences on his own, and when he has something on his mind that he wants to say. And I hesitate to even call this a news conference because it's more of a statement where he's going to be giving a speech to a crowd that's probably more supporters and lawmakers, and the journalists are kind of being put in the back of the room and not really. So far, we're not expecting them to be able to ask questions. But this is the type of atmosphere the president wanted to create to get something off of his chest. We see him do this from time to time, where he's really ready to speak his mind, not so much speaking from a teleprompter. I don't think there are teleprompters set up there. He may have some remarks that he brings in on paper that he marks up with Sharpies and adds his own presidential flourishes to. But this is going to be the president raw and unfiltered, and not necessarily doing what his advisors and what his campaign officials want him to do, but doing what he's been wanting to do for a while, which is to go after his enemies and speak his mind about this impeachment. You see it on his Twitter account, you see it with his various tweets, and sometimes in various interviews. But when he holds these types of news conferences, it's really to get something off of his chest. And a lot of times it means going after the people that he thinks have wronged him and naming them and shaming them. And that's something that he's done before. And if he's going to sort of follow that model here, we could be in for a pretty raucous 20, 30, maybe even longer minute press conference where he expresses some thoughts and views that are not seen as typically presidential, but definitely very much typical Trump.
Well, as we saw at the State of the Union this week, almost like a campaign rally type speech at times, something to garner support and to really kick off this 2020 campaign season in so many ways. We may see a similar level of enthusiasm and support here for President Trump. He's got all of his biggest supporters there in the room, people who saw him through this process, who supported him through it, both from Congress as well as outside of Capitol Hill. There is this question of whether the president is sort of free now, right? Is he unbridled? And is there a danger to that, Bob? And we talked earlier about, are these moderate Republicans a little nervous? Are people nervous? And you said, no, you don't see the sort of Republican anxiety about President Trump in this moment. But is there a concern about an unchecked President Trump in terms of how he acts, how he treats people? Or do his allies just see his way of doing business as one of his strengths?
Democrats have repeatedly raised the question about foreign election interference. He did not pay a price for how he handled the relationship with Ukraine and his relationship with President Zelensky, Rudy Giuliani's efforts. It all ended with acquittal in the United States Senate. So there's a concern among Democrats mostly that President Trump could be susceptible to having a pressure campaign again, whether it's on Ukraine or another country, in terms of going after Joe Biden, his political rival, or other political rivals.
As we wait here for President Trump to come in to the East Room, let's talk about the president's team in the trial process. His defense team, Jay Sekulow, Pat Cipollone. Pat Cipollone, not necessarily a household name and a face that we're used to, not one of those folks from the team like Jay Sekulow or Ken Starr or Alan Dershowitz, who's appeared on TV a lot. What's your sense of the president's opinion of how his team performed and represented him?
Based on conversations with White House officials, he thinks they did fine, but they didn't have a tough job because the Republican Party is so in lockstep with President Trump. It was not like they were making a full-throated case to win over Senate Republicans. When they were speaking in the well of the Senate, those lawyers, Dershowitz, Ken Starr, Jay Sekulow, they were speaking to the country, they were speaking to voters, and they were speaking to President Trump, giving him the message he wanted to hear, and they knew the Republicans would stick with them. The main argument that they made that was important was arguing against the need for witnesses by making this talking point the first and most important talking point, which is the House has done enough of an investigation. There is no need for additional witnesses to be called in the Senate side of this process. And there was a pressure campaign on senators to hew to that line, and it eked out a vote at the end. No witnesses were called.
They were successful alongside, as we see on the screen, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who has an iron grip on his caucus and has been able to, keep his caucus for the most part in line, with the exception of Mitt Romney. But for Trump's lawyers, they were successful, obviously, in getting the president acquitted, but there were no Democrats that crossed the aisle and said that the president would be acquitted in a bipartisan fashion. That's something that the White House talked about wanting to achieve. They also had several Republican senators who said and acknowledged that the House proved their case, which is not a vote of confidence in the president's lawyers. They just said that even though the House proved their case, that it wasn't impeachable. And we saw the president's lawyers raise a number of different defenses of the president, including this idea that if he does anything that's in the national interest because it advances his reelection, then it's not impeachable. And that was seen as sort of this outlandish legal theory that even other Republicans and even some other members of the president's legal team distanced themselves from.
The idea that it's in the public good if he wins re-election, so it's not like a selfish personal act, it's fulfilling a public duty, a public responsibility.
Right, and trying to defend the president's calls for Ukraine to interfere with the 2020 election. They said that even if he called for foreign interference, if he believed his re-election was in the public good, then that would not be an impeachable offense, and that is pretty far out of the mainstream legal opinion.
We certainly saw the lawyers giving a lot of options for senators to choose from as they crafted their defense and had to justify to their constituents and reporters as to why they were voting against witnesses or voting to acquit the president. They did have a job to do, which was not alienate the senators, right? Not alienate the Republican senators who needed to be here, some sort of sober analysis, some, legitimate speechifying that they could point to and say, this is why I believe that the president's team is right. And they were able to do that. They were able to present a defense that did not speak with the president's voice, in the sense that they weren't just standing up there and saying he's done nothing wrong, the call was perfect, full stop. I mean, they did give other options for the senators to choose from, Bob.
And they had to answer a few questions from senators, but it was a trial that was lacking in any kind of turning point because of the lack of witnesses and new documents. There's so much of this Ukraine story, as a reporter, we still do not know. Who was really directing things inside of the Pentagon, the State Department? Who knew? What was the president's exact involvement? What was Ambassador John Bolton's involvement as National Security Advisor? So little we learned from this trial and the House process, because a lot of it was secondhand, third-hand information given by U.S. officials.
So there are the president's lawyers, Pat Cipollone, Jay Sekulow. Looks like they're getting applause. The president's legal team who represented him before the Senate.
The person who really kept the president's team who really led the president's legal team was Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Pat Cipollone, White House counsel, Jay Sekulow, the outside lawyer, but it was McConnell who made this trial end the way it did with the verdict it had.
Let me take someone to thank Tolu Olorunipa and Robert Coster for joining us. We'll wait for the president to come out here and we'll bring you these remarks live and uninterrupted. We're waiting for the President Trump to come into the East Room to make remarks on his acquittal, which of course happened yesterday before the Senate. Just one Republican, Mitt Romney, joining with Democrats to vote to convict the President of the United States. This is President Trump's opportunity to address his supporters. This is a very friendly crowd, very friendly room. And so let's go now live to the White House.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Wow. We've all been through a lot together, and we probably deserve that hand for all of us because it's been a very unfair situation. I invited some of our very good friends, and we have limited room, but everybody wanted to come. We kept it down to a minimum, and believe it or not, this is a minimum. But a tremendous thing was done over the last number of months, but really if you go back to it over the last number of years, we had the witch hunt. It started from the day we came down the elevator, myself and our future First Lady who's with us right now. Thank you, Melania. And it never really stopped. We've been going through this now for over 3 years. It was evil, it was corrupt, it was dirty cops, it was leakers and liars. And this should never, ever happen to another president, ever. I don't know that other presidents would have been able to take it. Some people said no, they wouldn't have. But I can tell you, at a minimum, you have to focus on this because it can get away very quickly. No matter who you have with you, it can get away very quickly. It was a disgrace. Had I not fired James Comey, who was a disaster, by the way, it's possible I wouldn't even be standing here right now. We caught him in the act. Dirty cops, bad people. If this happened to President Obama, a lot of people would have been in jail for a long time already, many, many years. I want to start by thanking some of, and I call them friends, because, you know, you develop friendships and relationships when you're in battle and war, much more so than, gee, let's have a normal situation. With all that we've gone through, we've done, I think, more than any president and administration. And really, I say, for the most part, Republican congressmen, congresswomen, and Republican senators. We've done more than any administration in the first few years. You look at all of the things we've done. I watched this morning as they tried to take credit for the stock market from, think of that. Let me tell you, if we didn't win, the stock market would have crashed. And the market was going up a lot before the election because it was looking like we had a good chance to win. and then went up tremendously from the time we won the election till the time we took office, which was November 8th to January 20th. And that's our credit. That's all our credit. And leading up to that point was our credit because there was hope. And one of the reasons the stock market's gone up so much in the last few days is people think we're doing so well. They liked the State of the Union speech. It really is. It's a true honor to give it. Making the State of the Union speech, I was with some people that have been around. They've been all over the world. And one of them said, highly sophisticated person said, you know, no matter where you go in the world, it doesn't make any difference. There is nothing like what I witnessed tonight. The beauty, the majesty of the chamber, the power of the United States, the power of the people in this room. Really an amazing, even I don't think there is anything like that anywhere in the world. You can go to any other country, you can go to any other location, any other place. It's the beauty of everything. It's what it represents and how it represents our country. I want to start by introducing some of the people that are here. I know some are going to be left out, but they work so hard. And this is really not a news conference. It's not a speech. It's not anything. It's just we're sort of it's a celebration because we have something that just worked out. I mean, it worked out. We went through hell unfairly, did nothing wrong, did nothing wrong. I've done things wrong in my life, I will admit. Not purposely, but I've done things wrong. But this is what the end result is. You could take that home, honey. Maybe we'll frame it. It's the only good headline I've ever had in the Washington Post. I tell you. But every paper is the same. Does anybody have those papers? Does anybody have them? Because they're really like that, so I appreciate that. But some of the people here have been incredible warriors. They're warriors. And there's nothing from a legal standpoint. This is a political thing. And every time I'd say, this is unfair, let's go to court, they say, sir, you can't go to court. This is politics. And we were treated unbelievably unfairly. And you have to understand, we first went through Russia. It was all bullshit. We then went through the Mueller report. And they should have come back one day later. They didn't. They came back 2 years later, after lives were ruined, after people went bankrupt, after people lost all their money. People came to Washington to help other people. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, I say. They came, 1 or 2 or 3 people in particular, but many people. We had a rough campaign. It was nasty. It was one of the nastiest, they say. They say Andrew Jackson was always the nastiest campaign. They actually said we topped it. It was a nasty both in the primaries and in the election. But you see, we thought after the election it would stop, but it didn't stop. It just started. And tremendous corruption. So we had a campaign. Little did we know we were running against some very, very bad and evil people with fake dossiers, with all of these horrible, dirty cops that took these dossiers and did bad things. They knew all about it. The FISA courts should be ashamed of themselves. It's a very tough thing. And then we ended up winning on Russia. It should have taken the one day, as I said, and it took years. Then Bob Mueller testified. That didn't work out so well for the other side. But they should have said that first week because it came out. Is that right, Jim Jordan? They knew in the first 2 days, actually. Devin, is that right? 2 days, they knew that we were totally innocent. But they kept it going, Mark. They kept it going forever because they wanted to inflict political pain on somebody that had just won an election that to a lot of people was surprised. I mean, we had polls that said we were going to win. We had Los Angeles Times and a few papers actually said we were going to win, but it was going to be close. And we did win. It was one of the greatest wins of all time. And they said, okay, he won. And, you know, I wrote this down because that was where a thing called the insurance policy, to me, when I saw the insurance policy, and that was done long before the election, that was done when they thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And by the way, Hillary Clinton and the DNC paid for millions of dollars, the fake dossier. And now Christopher Steele admits that it's a fake because he got sued by rich people. I should have sued him too, but when you're president, people don't like suing. I want to thank my legal team, by the way, not for that advice, but for other advice. Pat, Jay, Pat, you guys stand up, please. Great job. Right at the beginning, they said, sir, you have nothing to worry about. All of the facts are on your side. I said, you don't understand. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. And that was really true. They made up facts. A corrupt politician named Adam Schiff made up my statement to the Ukrainian president. He brought it out of thin air, just made it up. They say he's a screenwriter, a failed screenwriter. He tried to go into, unfortunately, he went into politics after that. Remember, he said the statement, which is a mob statement, don't call me, I'll call you. I didn't say that. Fortunately, for all of us here today and for our country, we had transcripts. We had transcribers, professional transcribers. Then they said, oh, well, maybe the transcription is not correct. But Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and his twin brother, right? We had some people that really amazing. But we did everything. We said, what's wrong with it? Well, they didn't add this word or that. It didn't matter. I said, add it. They're probably wrong, but add it. So now everyone agrees that they were perfectly accurate. When you read those transcripts, Tim Scott, I don't know if Tim's here, but he said, sir, he's the first one to call me. Sir, I read the transcript. You did nothing wrong. And Mitch, he stayed there right from the beginning. He never changed. And Mitch McConnell, I want to tell you, you did a fantastic job. Somebody said, you know, Mitch is quiet. And I said, he's not quiet. He's not quiet. He doesn't want people to know him. And they said, is Mitch smart? I said, well, let's put it this way. For many, many years, a lot of very smart, bad in many cases, sometimes good, but people have been trying to take his place. And to the best of my knowledge, I've never even heard the subject come up because they've been wiped out so fast. This guy is great, and I appreciate it, Mitch. And he's also given us 191 now. 191 federal judges, 2 Supreme Court judges, right? We're up to 191. Yeah. Great guy. Great guy. He's a tough guy to read. I'm good at reading people. Tough guy to read, I'd call him. My wife would say, how'd you do with Mitch? I don't know. That's what makes him good, when you can read somebody. Fantastic job. And he understood right from this was crooked politics. This was crooked politics. How about all these people? They're running for office. They're saying the worst things about me, like 8 senators on the Democrat side. Most of them got wiped out. You know, they got their 1% or less. Most of them got less. They decided to go home. Let's go back to California. Let's go back to wherever they came from. Let's go back to New York. How about that one? Our New York Senator, Gillibrand. Let's go back to New York after they get nothing. And then they take an oath that they will be fair, that they will be reasonable, you know, all of the different things, and they had to sign. They're not fair, but here's the beauty. So we have 4 left. They're saying the most horrendous things about me. It's okay, it's politics. And then they're supposed to vote on me. They're trying to replace me, and then they're supposed to be voting. So I think it's incredible. But so Mitch, I want to thank you very much, incredible. And you have some of your folks here, and they're incredible people, and they've been right from the beginning. And again, you're out of session. Unfortunately, I only told these folks, let's do this today. We did a prayer breakfast this morning, and I thought that was really good. In fact, that was so good it might wipe this out. But by the time we finish, this will wipe that one out, those statements. I had Nancy Pelosi sitting 4 seats away, and I'm saying things that a lot of people wouldn't have said, but I meant every word of it. But we have some of the folks that are going to be leaving right after this, and they work hard, and they did work hard. Bill Cassidy, Senator. Stand up, Bill. What a guy. Great man. When I need to know about health insurance and pre-existing conditions and individual mandates, I call Bill, or I call Barrasso. We get those 2 guys, they know more than anybody. A man who just became a senator. He's a little bit like me. We have a couple of them. Very successful guy in business, and he said, what the hell? I'll run for the Senate from Indiana. And he ran, and I saw him on television destroying his opponent in a debate. I said, you know, this guy could win, and I got behind him. And Mike Braun, you have done some great job. Thank you very much. Tough. Thank you. A man who got James Comey to choke, and he was just talking in his regular voice. He's the roughest man. He's actually unbelievable, and I appreciate the letter you sent me today. I just got it. But he's got this voice that scares people. You know, people from Iowa can be very tough. We're doing very well in Iowa, but I'll tell you, Chuck Grassley, he's looking at Comey, well, you tell me, what did you say? Now, he wasn't being rough. That was just the way he talked. And that was when Comey, I think that was when Comey announced that he was leaking, lying, and everything else, right? He choked because he never heard anybody talk like that. You know, you should have gone, I wish you got angry. You could have gotten the whole ball game. He would have said, I give up. Chuck Grassley is an incredible guy. And a man who, he was running against a tough, smart campaigner. We learned out how good she was, right? She was a great campaigner. In fact, by the end of the campaign, she was actually, I thought she was more for me than you were, Josh. I was worried. I saw her ads. She was saying the greatest things about me. And you know who I'm talking about? And I went to a great place, Missouri, and I said, who do you have to beat her? And they said, well, we have 4 people. I said, let me see them. I got to interview people. Can you imagine? I'm interviewing people for the United States Senate. This is what I do. Where have I gone? But I love it. I love it because we're getting great people. The first one I met was Josh Hawley. After about 10 minutes, I said to the people, don't show me anybody else. This is the guy. He was the Attorney General, did a phenomenal job in the state, highly respected. And Claire McCaskill. So the theory was you couldn't beat her. Great campaigner. Remember the last campaign? She was going to be taken. She was always going to be taken out, and she wins. And people say, "How did that happen?" Didn't happen with him. But she got so friendly toward me. In fact, one of the ads I still have, I'm putting it in the archives as one of the best ads I've ever made. And she tried to convince people that we were best friends. But Josh ended up winning by 5 or 6 points. You were unbelievable. You were tough. And you are something. And one of the greatest supporters on the impeachment hoax was Josh Hawley. He was incensed, actually. I watched him. He was incensed at what they were doing and what they were saying. And those were the ones. You know, I had some that said, "Oh, I wish he didn't make the call." And that's okay. If they need that, it's incorrect. It's totally incorrect. And then you have some that used religion as a crutch. They never used it before. An article written today, never heard him use it before. But today, you know, it's one of those things. But, you know, it's a failed presidential candidate, so things can happen when you fail so badly running for president. But Josh Hawley, I want to thank you. You were right from the beginning. Man, did I make a good choice. Thank you, Josh. Tremendous future. A man who is brilliant and who actually was deceived to an extent, comes from a great state, Utah, where my poll numbers have gone through the roof, and one of the senators' poll numbers, and not this one, went down big. You saw that? You saw that, Mike? But Mike Lee is a brilliant guy. He's difficult. Whenever I sign bills, you know, we do sign a lot of legislation it's big and it's powerful, but it's sort of everybody has to approve it. And I see 99 to 1. 99 to 1. I say, don't tell me who's the one. Is it Mike? Yes. And he always has a good reason for it, too, by the way. But he's incredible. And right at the beginning, he knew we were right, Mike. And I appreciate it very much. You're just fantastic. And say hello to the people of Utah. And tell them, I'm sorry about Mitt Romney. I'm sorry. Okay? We can say that Mike Lee is by far the most popular senator from the state. But you've done a fantastic job, Mike, in many ways. In many ways. A young woman who I didn't know at all, but she's been so supportive, and I've had great support from other people in that state, and she's been so supportive, and she's been downright nasty and mean about the unfairness to the president. And Kelly Loeffler, I appreciate very much. Thank you. Great. She saw it very early on. And we have, I don't know if we have other senators here, but we got a hell of a lot of congressmen. I'll go over them quickly, but they have also been, you know, it helped when we won 197 to nothing. That's got to be a first, Kevin, right? Is that like a first? The Republicans have this image. See, I say Democrats are lousy politicians because they have lousy policy. Open borders, sanctuary cities, they have horrible policy. Who the hell can win? Oh, their new policy is raise taxes. They want to raise taxes. You know, all my life, I wasn't in politics, but I'd say, if you're a politician, you want to say, we're going to lower taxes. They want to raise taxes. So they have open borders, sanctuary cities, raise everybody's taxes, get rid of everybody's health care, 180 million people in the United States, and they're really happy. And we're going to give you a health care that's going to cost more money than the country could make in 30 years if it really does well. That's 1 year. So I've always said they're lousy politicians, but they do two things. They're vicious and mean, vicious. These people are vicious. Adam Schiff is a vicious, horrible person. Nancy Pelosi is a horrible person. And she wanted to impeach a long time ago when she said, I pray for the president. I pray for the president. She doesn't pray. She may pray, but she prays for the opposite. But I doubt she prays at all. And these are vicious people. But they do two things. They stick together. Historically, I'm not talking now. They stick together like glue. That's how they impeached, because they had whatever the number is, 220 people. So if they don't lose anybody, they'll be able to impeach anybody. You could be George Washington. You could have just won the war, and they say, let's get him out of office. And they stuck together, and they're vicious as hell. And they'll probably come back for more, but maybe not, because the Republican Party's poll numbers, Mitch, have now gone up more than any time, I think, since 2004, 2005, and you know what happened then? But in normal times, decades, you would call it. That was a little unusual time. It was for a very short period. The Republicans Party's poll numbers and Donald Trump's poll numbers are the highest I've ever had there. So maybe they won't. It's no way to get your poll numbers up. It's not worth it. Because from my family standpoint, it's been very unfair for my family. It's been very unfair to the country. Think of it, a phone call, a very good phone call. I know bad phone calls. This is a phone call where many people, I think Mike Pompeo was probably on the call. Where's Mike? Mike Pompeo was on the call. Many people were on the call. I know that many people. They even have apprenti, bringing up an old favorite word of mine, the apprentice. They have apprenti. They have people on these calls. And I know there are many, when I speak to the head of a nation, and they have many people on. I mean, also, do you think they're just, in the case of Ukraine, he's a new president. He seems like a very nice person, by the way. His whole thing was corruption. He's going to stop corruption. We even have a treaty, 2001, 1999. It's a treaty, signed treaty, that we will work together to root out corruption in Ukraine. I probably have a legal obligation, Mr. Attorney, to report corruption. But they don't think it's corrupt when a son that made no money, that got thrown out of the military, that had no money at all, is working for $3 million up front, $83,000 a month, and that's only Ukraine. Then goes to China, picks up $1.5 billion. Then goes to Romania, I hear, and many other countries. They think that's okay. Because if it is Ivanka in the audience? Is Ivanka here? Boy, my kids could make a fortune. They could make a fortune. It's corrupt. But it's not even that. It's just general corruption. And the other thing is mentioned in the call, and something that I've told Mike Pence, our great vice president, I would tell him all the time. And I told him when he went on the trip, because he was over there. He never mentioned anything about this when you had your meeting. It's a terrible thing. But I told Mike, I said, Mike, we're giving them money, and, you know, you're always torn about that, because we have our country to build, we have our cities to build, and our roads to fix. But we're giving them money. Tell me, why isn't Germany paying money? Why isn't France? Why isn't United Kingdom paying money? Why aren't they paying money? Why are we paying the money? Is that a correct statement, Mike? I say, find out what the hell's going on. And I told that to all of my people, OMB. I said, I asked that question. How much is Germany paying? Why isn't Germany paying? Why is the United States always the sucker? Because we're a bunch of suckers. But that's turning around fast. But it makes it harder when stuff like this happens, because you want to focus, and you want to focus perfectly. Think what we could have done if the same energy was put into infrastructure, prescription drug prices. Think of what we could have done. And I'm now talking both sides. Think of what we could have done if we had the same genius, because it's genius. I will say, it's genius on the other side. Maybe even more so, because they took nothing and brought me to a final vote of impeachment. That's a very ugly word to me. It's a very dark word, very ugly. They took nothing. They took a phone call that was a totally appropriate call. I call it a perfect call, because it was. And they brought me to the final stages of impeachment. But now we have that gorgeous word. I never thought a word would sound so good. It's called total acquittal. Total acquittal. So I want to, if I could real fast, just introduce a few of the people. I have to start with I have to start with Kevin. Man, did you do a job. Lucky you're there. Lucky you're there. Because it wouldn't have worked out. If you don't have the right people, I'll tell you, Kevin McCarthy has done an incredible job. And he loves his job, and he loves his country. Tell you what, Mitch and Kevin, they love what they do. Now, Mitch wouldn't even tell you he liked it. Say, Mitch, do you like it? I don't know. He's the greatest poker player, right? Kevin will say, I love it, right? And I will say that you're going to be Speaker of the House because of this impeachment hoax. I really believe it. I really believe it. And I'm going to work hard on it. I'm going to try and get out to those Trump areas that we won by a lot. And you know, in 18, we didn't win. We just won 2 seats in North Carolina, 2 wonderful seats in North Carolina that were not supposed to be won. But I went and I made speeches, and we had rallies, and we did a great job, and we won. We took 2 seats. Nobody writes about that. If we lost them, it would have been the biggest story of the year. But we're going to go. We're going to do a job, and we're going to win a lot of seats. We're going to win a lot of seats. People are very angry that Nancy Pelosi and all of these guys, I mean, Nadler, I know him much of my life. He's fought me in New York for 25 years. I always beat him. And I had to beat him another time, and I'll probably have to beat him again. Because if they find that I happen to walk across the street and maybe go against the light or something, let's impeach him. So I'll probably have to do it again, because these people have gone stone cold crazy. But I've beaten them all my life, and I'll beat them again if I have to. But what they're doing is very unfair, very unfair. So Kevin McCarthy has been great. So a few names, right? And there'll be a few you forget. If you want, you can raise, and I'll say, great, love to have you, wonderful. But we're going to do the best we can. And I have my cabinet, but my cabinet's different. I appoint them, okay? I didn't see all of them helping so much. You know, they were running their various bureaucracies, right? Now, my cabinet's great, and they're all here. But today is the day to celebrate these great warriors, right? These are great warriors. They really fought hard for us. And so I'll start Kelly Armstrong, North Dakota. Kelly, thank you. Great job. Great job. Jim Banks of Indiana. Jim, thank you. Great job. Andy Biggs. Where's Andy? Boy, oh boy, Andy. There's a guy. He's tough. I hear we're doing well in Arizona, huh? It's going good, yeah? I think so. I think I saw a poll that was very good. For me, I think we have to make sure Martha's going to do, I think Martha's going to do good. But we have some states that are going to be not easy. But Arizona's been great. And we're stopping illegal aliens from coming in. We're putting up walls. New Mexico, too, a state that's never been in play for Republicans, is totally in play, right? Nevada's really looking good. We're doing well. We're doing well. We're going to have a great, there's more spirit. I will say this. There's more spirit now for the Republican Party by far than the Democrats. You know, Mike Pence just got back from a beautiful place that Chuck Grassley knows well, Iowa. And he was talking about this fiasco, the Democrats. They can't count some simple votes, and yet they want to take over your healthcare system. Think of that. No, think of that. But we also had an election out there, and we got 98% of the vote. We have 2 people running, you know, and I guess they consider them non-people, but they are running. I mean, one was a governor, one was a congressman. They're running. We've got 98% of the vote. And everybody from the media was saying, who are those crowds over there? You know, they expect it to be one of these competitive where everybody's running because they want to win, they want to win. And it was Trump, right, Mark Meadows? It was Trump. This was a Trump crowd. And a lot of my guys went there. They went to Iowa, and a lot of friends went there, and we had tremendous, they say the spirit for the Republican Party right now is stronger, I think, than it's ever been in the history of our country. I think it's stronger than it's ever been. And that includes honest Abe Lincoln. You know, a lot of people forget Abe Lincoln. I wish he were here. I'd give him one hell of an introduction. But he was a Republican. Abe Lincoln, honest Abe. Bradley Byrne, Alabama. What a great place. Thank you, Bradley. A man who has been an unbelievable friend of mine and spokesman, and somebody that I really like. And I know, Kelly, you're going to end up liking him a lot. Something's going to happen that's going to be very good. I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. But Doug Collins, where is he? Where is Doug? You have been so great. Thank you very much, Doug. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Really amazing job. A young man who is born with a great gene, because I know his father and how great a politician he was, but he's from Florida. Sometimes controversial, but actually he's not controversial. He's solid as a rock, and he's a friend of mine, Matt Gaetz. Matt? Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Great job. All right, this guy. So he's the NCAA, meaning a couple of years ago when he was in college, wrestling champion. NCAA, that's the big deal. That means in all of college, you're the champ, you're the best. His record was ridiculous. Nobody could beat him. And I see it, every time I see it. When I first got to know him, Jim Jordan, when I first got to know Jim, I said, he never wears a jacket. What the hell's going on? He's obviously very proud of his body. And they say where he works out, with the congressmen, senators, they say when Jim works out, even though he's not as young as he was, but he works out, the machine starts burning down. It's just a different form of a workout than us, right, Sonny? And there he is. Look at that guy. But one day I'm looking, and he looks tough, and I'm looking at those ears. And I say, those ears have something going on there. I said, did you ever wrestle? Yeah, I did. But he doesn't talk. But I checked. This guy was a champion, top wrestler. And when I had I had all of the teams. And by the way, your Super Bowl champions are coming, I think next week or soon, very soon. And every one of them want to be here. And the coach loves us. The coach is great, Andy Reid. And every one of them want to be here. We have, people love it. But we had all of the NCAA championship teams here. They had the golf, the basketball, they had every team here. And one of the teams was wrestling. The wrestling team was that Penn State. And Penn State won the title. They have a great team. And I walked up with Jim, and it's like I didn't exist. Those wrestlers, they grabbed him. They love Jim Jordan, and we love you too, because you are some warrior. Ooh. A woman who became a star. We have a couple of women that became stars, you two. And I always liked the name of her, I liked the name, Lesko. I liked it. That's how I picked it. I liked the name. I saw that face. I saw that everything. They gave me cards. She had like 7 opponents, right? And you have no idea how much the public appreciates how smart, how sharp you are. This I can't tell. I can't tell. They just said, she's really good, she's really talented. I said, let's go. We worked with her. She won her race, tough race. It's no longer tough because what she does out there is incredible. Arizona loves her. But you were so incredible representing, I don't say me, representing our country and getting it out of this impeachment hoax. What you did was incredible. So Debbie, please stand up. Debbie, let's go. A man who I became very friendly with. I don't know why. You ever have where, I'll ask the media, certain people call, you take their calls. Other people call, if they don't have information, they won't take anybody's call. But other people call, and you don't. This is a guy, he's just a very special guy. His wife I actually like better than him, to be honest. Because he doesn't know that I know that he didn't actually support me right from the beginning, but she did. And on my worst day, right? On my worst day, my worst, I won't tell you why it was my worst, but it was not one of those good days. She got on a bus, got many other buses, and women all over North Carolina, and they toured North Carolina. Well, Mark was back sort of semi-supporting another candidate, which he ended up leaving very quickly. I don't think you had a choice because of your wife. But thank her. And Mark Meadows, he's an extraordinary guy. I mean, the only problem is, I guess he's announcing, he'd only win by 40 points, but he's announcing that he'll be not running this time. You have somebody good to run? Somebody going to win your district by at least 20 points, please? Okay? But he's a tremendously talented man, not just as a politician. As a human being, he's incredible. And during these horrible times, I mean, the way he worked, and Jim and all of you guys, the way they worked was so, it was like their life was at stake. So many. Ron DeSantis is another one. He worked so hard. Then he called me, he said, "Sir, I'd like to run for governor." He said, "Governor? I don't want you to run. I like you staying." "No, I want to run for governor." And I said, "Well, if you have to, I'd like your support." I said, "How can I support you? You're at 3. He was at 3. He had no money. Somebody else was at 38, and they had 22 million cash, right? I said, "Look, if it's important, I'll do it," because he's been another great warrior. And he's, by the way, he ran. I endorsed him. His numbers went through the roof. The man who we beat, who was expected to win easily, called me after the race. He said, "You endorsed him, and it was like a nuclear bomb went off. There was nothing I could do." He never even spent his money. He saved it. But Ron DeSantis is another one. And now he's the governor of Florida. And by the way, he's a great governor. He's a very popular governor. His numbers are in the 70s, and he's done a great job. But Mark, I want to thank you very much. Fantastic job. Thank you very much. Mark Meadows. And Mike Johnson of Louisiana. Where's Mike? Central Casting, what a job. You can represent me anytime. You can represent me anytime. Thank you. What a job you've done. Thank you, Mike. And a man nobody's ever heard of except the other side. He's the other side's worst nightmare. This guy goes down into dungeons and basements. He'll find a document no matter what. He's the most legitimate human being. He's the hardest worker. He's unbelievable. He took tremendous abuse. The media and, the other side and the bad ones, the leakers, the liars, the dirty cops, they wanted to destroy him. They tried. They got close, but he wouldn't let it happen. And honestly, in a certain way, he was the first one. Wouldn't you say, Jim and Mark and everything? This was the first guy. He came out of nowhere. He's saying, these people are corrupt. He's still saying it. And he was unbelievable. Devin Nunes, he was unbelievable. Unbelievable. That's so true, Devin. He'd come in and say, I didn't even know him. I just heard there was this congressman who kept going into a basement, into files. He knew something was wrong. You felt it, right? And now we know a lot more than we knew then, right? You never thought it was as bad as it is. And hopefully we're going to take care of things because we can never, ever allow this to happen again. Scott Perry of Pennsylvania. Scott, thank you. Thank you, Scott. Really great. And you're doing very well over there, by the way. Just so your numbers. A man who is Central Casting. If I'm going to pick Perry Mason, I'm going to do a remake of Perry Mason. Other than Bill Barr, I picked this guy, but I have to say I picked Barr. I picked Barr first, right? John Ratcliffe, right? But I have to tell you, if we're doing a remake of Perry Mason, the man I get, there's nobody in Hollywood like this, John Ratcliffe, right? Stand up, John. Such a great lawyer. Incredible guy, incredible talent, but just a great lawyer, and we appreciate it. He gets on that screen, and everyone says, I agree. The other side folds up so fast. We'll probably be using a lot of you in the next year. But you have been fantastic, John. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. A man who's braver than me and braver than all of us in this room, he got whacked. He got whacked. My Steve, right? I went to the hospital with our great First Lady that night, right, honey? And we saw a man that was not going to make it. He was not going to make it. He was the doctor. And I told him, his wife, I said, she loves you. Why do you say that? Because she was devastated. A lot of wives wouldn't give a damn. A lot of wives would have said, hey, yeah. I said, how's he doing? Oh, she couldn't even talk. She was inconsolable. Most wives would say, not good. Listen, I'm going home now. But the doctor came in. The wife is like, she was a total mess. She was really devastated. And it really looked like he had a 25% chance. I think you set a record for blood loss. And Steve Scalise, honestly, I think you're better looking now. You're more handsome now. You weren't that good looking. You look good now. He looks better now. Can you believe it? I don't know what the hell that is. True. Better now. What a guy. And he was practicing. He was practicing for the baseball game against, I guess, the Democrats, right? And this whack job started shooting, hurt Rogers. I don't know if Rogers is here, but hurt a number of people, hit him, but really hit Steve. Steve was at second base. He was the second baseman. And he went down, and it was terrible. I mean, I saw the whole thing, and it was terrible. Unfortunately, you had two brave policemen with you because of your high position in Congress. You had two policemen, and they were amazing. The man and the woman. And they came, and they didn't have rifles. They were against supposedly a pretty good sharpshooter with rifles, good equipment, and all they had was a gun. And they started coming in from the outfield shooting. And they're so far away that a handgun is not preferred. And this guy has the rifle, and he's hitting people, and he was going to move up, and there was no out. I mean, if he would have been able to move up, there was no way to get out. The entrance was a single entrance way on the other side where he was. So everyone went into the dugout, ran into the dugout. But Steve was really hit badly in the stomach, and with a bullet that rips you apart. It was supposed to do that. It rips you apart. And these two people came charging forward, boom, boom, boom. And one of them, you know who? One of them, him, got the shooter, hit him, and then got him, killed him from long distance. It was amazing. If you didn't have those two people, you can imagine, right? You could imagine what would happen. So Melania and I went to the hospital that night, and he was in such bad shape, and he's been working ever since so hard. But 6 months ago, they had a baseball game at the Nationals Park, and I'm watching. And it's on television. And it's just, game, people, you want to win it, right? And Steve's at second base. The poor guy can't even walk. Do you remember Bobby Richardson for the New York Yankees? He was known for range, Louis. Range. He had the greatest range. If a ball's hit the shortstop, Bobby Richardson's the second baseman. Bobby Richardson would field the ball. If it's hit the first base, he'll throw it to the first baseman. He had unbelievable range. This was not Steve Scalise. Steve had no range. 1 foot, and he has to fall down, right? Because, he was trying to get better. I don't know who the hell put you on the field. And this is a true story. So the game starts, and the first pitch, Steve's standing at second base, and the guy is really in bad shape. And I said, this is terrible. A shot, ground ball shot, is hit to second. And Steve, I say, I didn't have time to think too much, but I said, this is not good. That ball is going toward him. And this guy stopped that ball, caught the ball. He's now laying down. He throws the ball to first base. He gets him out. I said, it's the most incredible thing. I've never seen athletically. I've never seen anything like it. Right? And he gets him out, and they then took him out of the game, which was a very wise thing, because you could never do that again in a million years. But you weren't going to let that ball go through. I don't care if it was hit by the greatest of all time, right? That ball was not going through you, because you are a warrior. Steve, he is fantastic. You are fantastic. You and Liz and Kevin, what a group. I mean, what a group. I got lucky, because you need the right people. If I had the wrong people there, be maybe a different story. Maybe we'd be celebrating something else. But I really want to thank you, Steve Scalise. And Elise, you, I just read the story. It's the most incredible what's going on with you, Elise. So I even said, I was up campaigning for helping her, but I thought, she looks good. She looks like good talent. But did I not realize when she opens that mouth, you were killing them, Elise. You were killing them. Elise, and there's a big story in the New York Post. I love the New York Post because they treat me well. There aren't too many of you that do, but today you're treating me well. I even had a great headline. New York Times, Washington Post. I had all these great headlines. Maybe we should just end it right there. But you had the greatest story yesterday in the Post, that people from all over the country are contributing to her campaign. They were so enthralled with the way you handled yourself, what you said, the way you said it, and I'll always be your friend. I think it's really an amazing story. What a great future you have. What a great future. Thank you. First Lady agrees, by the way. First Lady agrees. And Michael Turner, you can represent me anytime. Where's Michael? Where is he? Well, you can represent me. How good were you? There's another Perry Mason type, I think, right? What do you think, John? But Michael, you were fantastic, and we appreciate it. Brad Wenstrup. Where's Brad? Brad. Great. It's a big day for lawyers. You notice only the lawyers stayed. All the lawyers stayed behind. Lee Zeldin, how good are you? How good are you? Man. And Louis, your name's not down. They didn't give me your name. Do you know if I didn't announce Louis, whoever the hell made this list, I got to get rid of him, because if I wouldn't have announced Louis, it might have been the end of the presidency. Louis, you have been so great, so tough, and so smart. I got it. But Louis has been amazing. He's a tough guy. He's a smart guy. He's streetwise like crazy. We love Texas. And we're with you all the way, Louis. We're with you all the way. Thank you very much. So that's the story. We have a great group of warriors, and there are others left, and I guess probably, I'm sure I didn't mention a few, and I apologize if that's the case. How's CPAC doing? Good? My man, stand up, please, will you? He's the one who said you should run. Right? Matt said, it's like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and I made a speech, and then they do some kind of a straw poll. Who made the best speech? And he said, I made the best speech. With all these professional, I hate to say this, with all these professional politicians, they voted by far the best speech was Trump. He calls me, he says, you should run for politics. I say, what do I know about politics? But you know what? We learned quickly, and our country has never done better than it's doing right now. So it's pretty good. But thank you, Matt. Great. Say hello. So that's the story. We've been treated very unfairly. Fortunately, we have great men and women that came to our defense. If we didn't, this would have been a horrific incident for our country. When you have Lisa and Peter, the lovers, the FBI lovers, I want to believe the path you threw out for Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. That's the office. There's no way he gets elected, meaning me. There's no way he gets elected. This is Peter to Lisa. He's probably trying to impress her for obvious reasons. There's no way he gets elected. But I'm afraid we can't take the risk. Now think of this. In other words, if I get elected, two lowlifes, they can't take the risk. They can't take the risk. Think of it. And that's where it came up, the greatest word of all, insurance policy. So he says, but I'm afraid we can't take the risk. She may lose. It's like an insurance policy. In the unlikely event you die before you're 40. In other words, if I won, they were going to do exactly what they did to us. They were going to try and overthrow the government of the United States, a duly elected president. And if I didn't fire James Comey, we would have never found this stuff. Because when I fired that sleazebag, all hell broke out. They were ratting on each other. They were running for the hills. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. It's in the hands of some very talented people. We're going to have to see what happens. But I can tell you, in my opinion, these are the crookedest, most dishonest, dirtiest people I've ever seen. They said, this is struck. God, Hillary should win 100 million to 1. This is about me. This is an agent from the FBI. Look how they let her off. 33,000 emails deleted. Nothing happens to her. Nothing happens. It's unbelievable. But think of that. God, Hillary should win. These guys are investigating Hillary. Then they go to work for Mueller, the two of them. And when Mueller found out that everybody knew that they were 100% this way, he let them go. But they deleted all of their emails and text messages. So when we got the phone, they were all deleted. Could you imagine the treasure trove? They illegally deleted. So they left Bob Mueller. He had the look, but he didn't have a lot of other things. Always had the look, Mr. G-Man. And I love the FBI, and the FBI loves me, 99%. It was the top scum, and the FBI people don't like the top scum. So think of that, 100 million to 1, and he's investigating me. And then, God, Trump is a loathsome human being, isn't he? These are the people looking at me. I'm really not a bad person. And Page said, yes, he's awful. How would you like to have that? This is the good stuff. This stuff 100 times worse than that. These are all dirty people. And now, I just heard that they're suing the United States of America because they were interfered with. Not going to let it happen. Just not going to let it happen. We cannot let this happen to our country. Can't. So I'm going to leave now, and I don't know if any of you have anything to say. You could say it, but this is sort of a day of celebration because we went through hell, and I'm sure that Pelosi and Crying Chuck, I've known this guy all the time. The only time I ever saw him cry was when it was appropriate. Known him for a long time, Crying Chuck. But I'm sure they'll try and cook up other things. They'll go through the state of New York. They'll go through other places. They'll do whatever they can. Because instead of wanting to heal our country and fix our country, all they want to do, in my opinion, it's almost like they want to destroy our country. We can't let it happen. Jim Jordan, did you want to say something? Go ahead. Huh? Mark?
I wanted to just say that this reflection today is a small reflection of the kind of support you have all across the country. We've got your back.
Thank you. Thank you. This was a highly partisan situation. Pelosi said, I copied it down exactly. before the impeachment. She wanted to impeach from day one, by the way. Don't let it fool you. You know, she said, no, the impeachment is a very serious thing. I said, she wants to impeach. Watch. Impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and so overwhelming and bipartisan, it was 197 to nothing. And other than one failed presidential candidate, and I call that half a vote because he actually voted for us on the other one. But we had one failed presidential candidate. That's the only half a vote we lost. So we had almost 53 to nothing. We had 197 to nothing. And the only one that voted against was a guy that can't stand the fact that he ran one of the worst campaigns in the history of the presidency. But she said, there's something so compelling, has to be so compelling and so overwhelming and bipartisan. I don't think we should go down that path because it divides the country. She was right about that. And it's just not worth it. That was Nancy Pelosi a year ago, right? And I think it's a shame. I think it's a shame. But as I said, if we can put this genius to work on roads and highways and bridges and all of the things we can do, prescription drugs. You know, we had Secretary Azar's here, and I want to thank him for this, but we had first time in 51 years where drug prices actually came down last year. First time in 51 years. But what we can do working with both parties in Congress would be unbelievable. It would be unbelievable, what we can do. And I know Chuck Grassley is working very hard on it, and Mitch is working very hard on it. But what we can do is incredible. What we can do just generally. We've done so much without it. We've rebuilt our military. We've cut regulations at a level that nobody thought possible. We'll always protect our Second Amendment. We all know that. But I just want to tell you that it's an honor to be with you all. I want to apologize to my family for having them have to go through a phony, rotten deal by some very evil and sick people. And Ivanka's here, and my sons, and my whole family. And that includes Barron. That includes Barron, who's up there as a young boy. Stand up, honey. Ivanka, thank you, honey. Come. So I just want to thank my family for sticking through it. This was not part of the deal. I was going to run for president, and if I won, I was going to do a great job. I didn't know that I was going to run, and then when I got in, I was going to have to run again and again and again. Every week I had to run again. That wasn't the deal, but they stuck with me. And I'm so glad I did it because we are making progress and doing things for our great people that everybody said couldn't be done. Our country is thriving. Our country is just respected again. And it's an honor to be with the people in this room. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
President Trump and the First Lady Melania Trump leaving the East Room to the sounds of God Bless America. President Trump declaring victory over this impeachment process, calling it a witch hunt, calling it a lot of names, including using the word bullshit to describe the Russia investigation that led up to this point, going after those he considers to be his enemies, calling them dishonest and dirty, and praising the friends in this room full of friends and supporters, everyone from his family to members of Congress to members of his cabinet who he believes helped him get through this. This is live coverage from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey, and I'm joined here by Tolu Olorunipa, who covers the White House. Tolu, what did you take away from the president's address today?
It was a bizarre display of President Trump at his rawest, unfiltered form. It was very much without any kind of structure. It was rambling at times. The president was speaking his mind, saying whatever came to his mind in the very moment right before it came out of his mouth. We got to see the mind of the president working, and we saw how bizarre that can be at times, with the president talking about everything from Steve Scalise being shot and saying that he was not handsome before, but after he was shot, he became handsome. The president was not following any kind of script. The only things that he wanted to get off of his chest was that, as you said, he wanted to attack his enemies, including the Senator Mitt Romney, member of his own party, and all of the Democrats that pushed impeachment, and the members of the intelligence community, the FBI, who he called human scum, said that they were, the leaders of the FBI were scum. Those types of attacks you don't normally hear from the East Room of the White House. You don't normally hear the profanity that the president used as well. But this, as I said, was the president at his rawest, speaking directly what came into his mind without any kind of filter at all.
The president apologizing at one point, but not for any action that he committed, apologizing to his family for having them have to go through what he called a phony, rotten deal by some very evil and sick people. Let's bring Bob Costa into the conversation. Bob, what are your takeaways from this speech? And it's important not to call it a press conference because he obviously didn't take questions. It's an address that he gave from the East Room.
I was just texting with a couple White House sources, and they said this is going to happen every day. Not this exact thing in the East Room, but what we saw over the last, how long was that?
An hour. Just an hour.
It was about an hour.
Is what we will see, whether it's on the campaign trail.
I was looking at the clock, by the way.
In the White House?
Yeah.
This is President Trump, a president I covered as a candidate who is now being, as Toulouse said, his full self. There's actually a moment in that hour-long experience that stood out to me, and it was a minor moment, but I think it's worth referring to, which is his mention of Bobby Richardson, the old Yankees infielder. Most people in that room have no idea who Bobby Richardson is. Mr. Richardson is actually still alive, hope he's well, but a famous player for the Yankees in their powerhouse teams in the early 1960s. I thought that moment was interesting to me as a reporter because when I used to cover President Trump when he was a candidate, even before he was a candidate, I used to go visit him at his office at Trump Tower or at his golf club in Virginia, and there'd be pictures of old Yankees and baseball players and golfers all around his office, his golf club, and he is someone who, as Steve Bannon once told me, really thinks of the world in Mad Men terms. And that as much as he's in 2020 as the ultimate media president, he's also someone who has this sensibility that many of his critics say is strange, but it's rooted in the 1960s, in Queens, New York, and the battles in the boroughs, and real estate, New York City, baseball. And in a modern era, it rings a little off for many Americans, but it tells you a lot about who Trump is and who this president is going to be in the months to come. Someone who is so much embodied of an older America, a different America, not part of this fast-changing culture. And instead of trying to move to the center or move to try to be more modern, he's going back and citing Bobby Richardson. And Perry Mason.
Let's go now to Rhonda Colvin, who's on the North Lawn of the White House. Rhonda, what are your highlights and takeaways from the president's address?
Yeah, you know, Libby, it was a lot. For the last hour, it was very unscripted. It was very candid. We sort of expected that because we did not receive any sort of comments ahead of time. And the president covered a lot of related and unrelated topics to the impeachment. He began with playing Hail the Chief. That started off things. He said that this was more about a celebration, saying that he would not take any questions. This was really about celebrating the moment for him and his team. And he jumped right in just in a few minutes after he came in and said, "Thank thank you. He started calling the investigators dirty cops, called James Comey a dirty cop. He also referenced that the room was pretty full this morning when we were standing in line to get in there. There was a lot of confusion. Press aides were telling us that they had not yet accommodated for how many members of the media would be there and visitors, so they were thinking about moving it elsewhere, but it is raining outside, so they knew they couldn't do it out in the Rose Garden, but there was a little bit of confusion this morning about that, where it would take place. I don't think that there were many surprises. We knew that he would go after Democrats. One point he did say that he believes that Kevin McCarthy, now the minority leader in the House, will become the speaker after this. So he said he was going to work hard at making sure that happens. And when he called the Russia investigation BS, he didn't use that term, he used the full term. I noticed the reporters around me, everyone was kind of taken aback, and it's hard to surprise Hill and White House reporters anymore, but a lot of people were surprised at how he said that. So again, it was very candid, very open. We knew that he would come out and show his anger toward Democrats.
Thanks so much, Rhonda. Let's talk about the language he used for his opponents and people who he feels have been persecuting him. Talking about Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, also Chuck Schumer, saying they want to destroy our country. Who else was he targeting? Who stood out to you, Bob?
Who didn't he target?
Mitt Romney came under fire.
It's true. I mean, he is his full self right now. It is fire and fury, to steal a term from President Trump. For Democrats, the challenge is going to be, he's going to be vicious every day. How are you going to define yourself? Can you get oxygen in this political war? It really is the beginning of political war. I said a little earlier in our discussion, this was the beginning of the campaign, the end of the trial and the beginning of a campaign. I actually think it's now a little bit different. It's the end of a trial and the beginning of political war. And President Trump is laying it there in broad strokes. And he's saying to his opponents, if you're going to come at me, I will call you evil, malicious, sick, corrupt. I mean, we use the thesaurus once in a while as reporters to try to, I don't know what other words are more vitriolic and harsher than what President Trump used to describe his opponents just now. The consequence of it, it makes our political climate extremely tense and deeply personal, and we're not covering policy debates so much anymore, but personal standoffs.
He mocked Jim Comey, he mocked Robert Mueller, he brought up the Russia investigation, calling it BS. Does he see all of these things just tied together? He said that the witch hunt started the moment he came down that escalator in New York.
Yeah, that's the kind of message he's tried to put out, that this was not about just Ukraine and all of the egregious activities that he's accused of in terms of holding up military aid to pressure Ukraine to investigate his political rivals. He's trying to bring this back to other things that were unrelated and that he believes it's part of a broader, same terminology, witch hunt, hoax, campaign strategy against him to attack him and to delegitimize his presidency since he, started running for president and since he, shocked the world and actually won in 2016. And he loves to play the role of victim, to be this aggrieved person who has been attacked by the powerful bodies of our government, including the FBI and the intelligence communities and the House and the Senate to a certain degree as well, since he was, tried by the Senate. And that's part of his message, is that this isn't just about Ukraine. This is about a broader conspiracy, if you will, against me and against my presidency. That's where the president feels most comfortable. He had a lot of facts wrong as he, tried to make that case, but that's where he's comfortable in trying to say that even though I'm the most powerful man on the planet, I am the victim of all of these various forces that are arrayed against me, out to get me. And he feels very comfortable in doing that. And just to Bob's point, as this is a new political war, not only did he go after his opponents, but he made sure to rally his troops. He gave shout outs to all of the people who have been, in his words, warriors for his cause in the House, in the Senate. And he spent a lot of time, a lot of that 1 hour press conference was individually naming the people that he felt were loyal and on his team.
And one of those he mentioned was Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who we've discussed. His line, I believe, on McConnell today was tough to read. he appreciated his support.
He even talked about his wife asking him how did it go, and he's saying, I don't know. You know, I don't know. Like when you've had a conversation with Mitch McConnell, that he couldn't read him even.
McConnell is famously terse and does not show emotion at all, if ever. And so for President Trump, who's if not an emotional figure, he's someone who deals in a personality-driven political space. McConnell, though, is such an example of the transactional relationship many Republicans in that room have with him. They may not like him per se, they may not have great relationships with him, they may not want to golf with him, but they are working with him and they see him as the undisputed leader of the Republican Party. And President Trump threaded that all together today in his own way.
Even as President Trump praised Republicans who stood by him, he also took credit for some of them. Josh Hawley, for one, Senator Debbie Lesko, a member of Congress, for another. He basically acted as though he had picked them and plucked them up and then formed them into what and who they are today, saying that he picked Debbie Lesko's name off a card of 7 random names and just chose it because he liked it. So he's both simultaneously saying that he appreciates their help, but also essentially that they should appreciate his help as well.
It reminds me of Tammany Hall, that old school way of politics being driven by a boss, a party boss. And we often cover politics as this executive branch, legislative branch, but what President Trump revealed today was our political system still has that boss element to it. And he wants it to be, he wants the Republican Party to be not only in his image, but under his grip. And he made clear to all of them in that room, they owe him, and he politically has a stake in their future.
And it was a message not only to the people in the room, but also some of the Republicans outside of the room that aren't rock-solid Trump supporters, that if you cross this president, that he is willing to take revenge. If you support him, he can pluck you out of obscurity and make you the next governor of Florida, or make you more powerful than you would have ever been if you just decide to be loyal to him and fight on his behalf. But if you waver even a little bit, and if you take any votes that are against him, then he is going to use his platform to attack you viciously and publicly like he did to Mitt Romney. And that's what we expect him to continue to do as he faces re-election.
The only other person who spoke in the room was Mark Meadows. You know, he was brought up by the president at first as someone whose wife was actually a better supporter of the president than Congressman Meadows. But then when Congressman Meadows got a moment to speak, he was off mic, but you could hear him say that people in this room are just, you know, one part of basically of who supports you, Mr. President. So using that time to sort of allow the president to bask even more in the support and affection of in Mark Meadows' eyes, you know, the nation and others.
That Mark Meadows moment was very indicative of how things work in the Republican Party right now. I remember covering 2016, and Debbie Meadows' wife was supportive of the president in the wake of Access Hollywood, that tape that David Fahrenthold broke here at the Washington Post. Debbie Meadows and other women in North Carolina went on a bus, as I remember, and they campaigned for President Trump, even though the Access Hollywood tape had raised questions with many women and men about the president's conduct.
And the president said there that that was one of, like, a low point in his life. I won't go into details, but a low point.
It was a low point for him. In fact, I interviewed President Trump the day after Access Hollywood, then candidate Trump. And I always remember this interview because I called him up in the morning. Access Hollywood breaks on a Friday. I called him up on Saturday morning. He was watching TV, as you might imagine. And I said, "Are you going to quit the race? We're hearing you're going to quit." And he said, "I will never withdraw. I will never withdraw." And then he told me, he said, in this Bobby Richardson vein, he said to me, "You don't understand life." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "You don't understand life." He said, "You don't understand life. I'm never going to quit. I've seen everything. This is nothing. This is nothing. You don't understand. This is nothing." And so down in the article on that Sunday's paper, I had a line, I believe. Mr. Trump told this reporter, "You don't understand life." I'm still learning life. So.
Well, let's look at one of the moments that will live on from this press conference and in many minds for a while, because it's that visual contrast of the president talking about the moment, even as he picked up the newspapers and showed on the front page just what it said here. I'll pick it up right here.
I thought the Washington Post wasn't allowed at the White House anymore.
Well, there is we were told that they were no longer subscribers to subscribing to any of the newspapers that they found to not be in lockstep with how the president viewed things. But let's take a look at this moment. It also included a rare admission of not being perfect by the president. Watch this.
Went through hell. unfairly, did nothing wrong. Did nothing wrong. I've done things wrong in my life, I will admit. Not purposely, but I've done things wrong. But this is what the end result is. So, you could take that home, honey. Maybe we'll frame it. It's the only good headline I've ever had in the Washington Post.
President Trump earlier today, as he addressed his supporters in the East Room, what does this moment mean for the president's time in office, Bob, as you look at the series of events that have led up to the acquittal? He will still go down in history as an impeached president.
He will. As the president was holding up our newspaper, I kept thinking of that old Washington Post advertising slogan, if you don't get it, you don't get it. He gets it clearly, at least today, he gets the paper. So it's good to see a print edition reader of the paper. Too rare sometimes. But he is impeached, and Speaker Pelosi said at her news conference today, he will never be able to wipe the stain of impeachment from his record, and that is true. He will remain one of the only American presidents who has ever been impeached. But he was acquitted in the Senate. And in a way, this entire day clears the decks between now and November. We've been through the Mueller report. The Post has been on top of that. It won a Pulitzer Prize for its coverage. We have been through impeachment. The Post has been on top of that. Stephen Ginsburg, our editor, he emailed me earlier today and he said, well, what now? You want to go cover Bloomberg, Buttigieg, Bernie? And to me, that email was a one-line email. It tells you a lot. We've been through so much in 3 years. It's now about the campaign. He's impeached. He has many controversies, too many to list. He has many challenges. He lost control of the House in 2018. But from now until November, not much policy is likely to get done. It's a free-for-all political war.
And the fact that he has support from Republicans, even though he was impeached, even though he did something that several of them think was improper, the fact that they're willing to show up at the White House and applaud him and still say, we have your back, Mr. President, that will likely embolden him. And I would be surprised if this is the last scandal that we see this president go through. He has been impeached. I would be surprised if the House decides to impeach him again. But he does feel emboldened. He does feel vindicated. He does feel free to carry out the powers of the presidency. And I would be surprised if we're not rehashing more scandal from this president going forward, in part because he has had the ultimate punishment close to it. He wasn't removed from office, but the actual impeachment in the House is the strongest constitutional remedy that the House has against him. Republicans control the Senate, so there's no sense that they're going to, pursue any kind of constitutional remedy against him. So there is some sort of freeing aspect to that, and this is a president that has shown that when he feels free, when he feels unbridled, that he's willing to take steps beyond the pale.
And Democrats have such a choice ahead of them right now. Who do they want to counter this kind of performance we saw today? Do they want a seasoned hand who's a little bit older, who's been around for 8 years with President Obama and Joe Biden? Do they want someone who's younger and has the manner of a debate champion, someone who's very articulate, even though he's lacking in some experience, has only been a two-term mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and Pete Buttigieg? Do they want a movement politician, an older, progressive, self-proclaimed Democratic socialist in Bernie Sanders? Or do they want another brash New Yorker in Mayor Michael Bloomberg, another wealthy American, a little bit more to the center? Such a diversity of choices in terms of the ideology and the character and presentation they each bring to the table. And the Democrats do not seem yet to have settled on where exactly they want to go. The field is muddled. So President Trump has the Republicans fully behind him, and the Democrats are still figuring out, how do you counter this blizzard of statements and claims, at times lies, exaggerations? How do you counter it? How do you get your message to break through? Can you do it?
And the big question so many voters are saying is, who can be President Trump? So as you talk to Democratic voters, their questions are not who's going to fix healthcare, who's going to do this. It's like who will beat President Trump. Can a woman do it? Can Elizabeth Warren or Amy Klobuchar be a strong counter to President Trump, or all the other people that you named? We witnessed today President Trump taking a tone that was strident, angry, vicious, and ultimately victorious. Let's contrast that now with how then President Bill Clinton started his address after he was acquitted. This is way back in February 1999.
Now that the Senate has fulfilled its constitutional responsibility, bringing this process to a conclusion, I want to say again to the American people how profoundly sorry I am for what I said and did to trigger these events and the great burden they have imposed on the Congress and on the American people.
President Clinton 21 years ago, February, he also went on to basically call for unity and reconciliation in the country. Let's get final thoughts from you two as you reflect on that tape and think about today. Bob?
President Clinton and what happened in 1999 do offer a contrast to what we saw today. But I would just end, at least my perspective on this Thursday, by saying what we saw in 1999 and what we saw here in 2020 are actually not that different. President Clinton, Newt Gingrich, the battles in the 90s, partisanship on the rise, the ascent of cable news, polarization, eventually the rise of nationalism. The story of the Trump impeachment is a story that began this fall and last summer with the calls with Ukrainian President Zelensky, but the bigger political story has been going on for decades. The fracturing of the American political scene, the way huge personalities, at times extreme personalities, take the center and dominate parties. Whether it was Newt Gingrich, Bill Clinton had a huge hand over his own Democratic Party. And moving ahead, it's all the campaign. And the Democratic race is now the story. President Trump just said to the nation, here I am, here's exactly who I am. Raw, unvarnished, no pander to the center, no real political spin, brutal politics. And he's saying to the Democrats, who are you going to put up against me?
Yeah, the president, as Bob said, declared war. He used his post-impeachment speech to declare war on the opposite party and even on at least one member of his own party who voted against him, and to declare war on anyone who dares to cross him in Congress or elsewhere. He's trying to show of force that he has the support of the American people behind him. That's why he had so many supporters in the room applauding him, asking them to speak in his favor. And I would not be surprised if we do continue to see this type of behavior from the president. He is very much emboldened by what happened in the Senate, and he feels free to be himself. And whether that means attacking opponents, having a rambling speech where he bounces from topic to topic, even as all the networks cover him, he is going to soak up this entire spotlight and be himself through this entire campaign. And he's going to blow up a lot of political norms, more than he's done already, and I think we can expect that for the next 9 months.
So well said. Well, Tolu Olorunipa, Robert Costa, thank you so much to both of you for being with us today. Thank you for watching this remarkable day in history with the newsroom of the Washington Post. We are a newspaper, so I want to leave you with a study of headlines. First, here's the front page headline on February 13th, 1999. Alone, President responds with simple apology. The article noted that President Clinton's speech was plain and purposeful and attempted to convey humility. You can contrast that headline and that iconic photo of President Clinton biting his lip, thinking about that with President Trump and what we just saw today. This afternoon's headline simply states, Trump celebrates acquittal at the White House. Well, thank you for watching us. We appreciate your time. I'm Libby Casey. Good afternoon.